We can wait for a few
Jinto?
minutes and then start.
Jinto?
Yes, sir.
I'm Pintu.
Pindu, I think we can start, right?
As Ravi is saying, maybe we can wait a couple of minutes more.
Okay.
But skin is visible or?
It's visible.
Yeah,
it is visible to us. What about you? I don't know.
Yeah, it is visible. It's visible also on the YouTube live.
YouTube also, yes.
It is visible to me too.
Okay. Then why did you ask that question?
No, it was not. It was not visible in the beginning.
Okay.
So I refreshed the page, and then it came.
Hello. എന്നാ തുടങ്ങാം.
I think it is time to start. First of all, thanks to Dr. Reggie Ferry for accepting our invitation. And I request Dr. A.B. Ravi to introduce the speaker.
Hello there. It's my job now to introduce my good old friend Reggie. So Professor Reggie Philip and myself, we were colleagues at Cochin University during our PhD days, and after his PhD, he worked as if I'm not mistaken, as a postdoctoral fellow at Regensburg in Germany, and after that at TFR Mumbai, before finally joining Raman Research. But I think Reggie also spent some time at Indore at Raja Ramanna Center in the ultra-fast laser division, and at Raman Research he pursues ultra-fast spectroscopy and laser-produced plasma, and he is supposed to be one of the leading researchers in ultra-fast spectroscopy in India. And he has co-authored more than 210 research articles in peer-reviewed journals. He also holds 2 patents and also contributed to 3 book chapters. Over and above this, he has also mentored several PhD students, postdocs, and master project students. And Dr. Reggie Philip is a reviewer to several international journals from reputed publishers like American Institute of Physics, American Chemical Society, Optical Society of America, etc. And he has been in the organizing committees of several national, international optics conferences, and has held visiting scientist positions at University of Massachusetts in Boston, and also the University of Central Florida. And he has given several invited and keynote lectures all over the world. But this particular talk, which I've heard him give before, is a very interesting talk on Raman and a perspective of Raman that probably only faculty members from Raman Research Institute will be able to put forward to us. So I welcome Reggie, and Reggie, let's hear it.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for those very kind words of introduction. And I have to thank you for proposing this to me, proposing that I should give a talk on Raman in the IPR colloquium series, which I very happily accepted. And this talk is a result of that. And I am very thankful to Jinto for all the encouragement, and also to Dr. Pintu for taking care of everything else. So this talk is titled C.V. Raman, the man, the scientist. So I hope to spend nearly equal time on both aspects of Raman. How we perceive him as a man, as a human, and as the scientist, the great scientist he was. So as we know, Raman won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1930 for his pioneering work on the scattering of light. And his discovery, which was announced to the Associated Press on 29th February 1928, is named after him and is now known as the Raman effect. And the day of the discovery, that is 28th February, is celebrated as the National Science Day in India. He was born in 1888 on the 7th of November at near Trichy, Tamil Nadu. And his father was a professor of mathematics and physics at a nearby college in Visakhapatnam. And his mother was Parvati Ammal, and she hailed from a family of Sanskrit scholars. So this is Raman's house. This is where Raman was born. And this is his ancestral house, which is a little away from the house where he was born. His education was, his BA was from Presidency College in Madras in 1904, and he stood at the first place and he won the gold medal in physics from there. And from the same college, in 1907, he received his MA degree with the highest distinctions. And this is a view of the physics lab at the Presidency College in those days. And this is a photograph of Raman as a college student, which was taken in 1906. Now this photograph is of the BA class of the Presidency College, taken in 1903, and we can see Raman standing here. Raman's face is circled here, so his classmates and his faculty members, his teachers are here. So Raman was an excellent student, and he received several accolades from his teachers. In fact, his teachers said about him, "The best student I have had in 30 years, a young man of independence and strength of character, exhibits an unusual appreciation of English literature and a facility in idiomatic expression, possessing great alertness of mind, and is strongly intellectual." So these are some of the comments about Raman by his teachers of those days. And in 1906, he published his first scientific paper while he was still doing his MA, and this was on diffraction. It appeared in the Philosophical Magazine. He was also a very good violinist, in fact, probably because his father also played the violin very well, and Raman was deeply interested in music and acoustics. We will see that the initial research work he did, most of it, a lot of it was on acoustics. And in fact, later, Raman writes a monograph on the violin, which was autographed by none other than the famous violinist Yehudi Menuhin. In 1907, while visiting his friend Ramaswamy Shivan's house in Madras, he hears the Tyagaraja Kirtana, Rama ni samanam evru. So the meaning is, Rama, is there anyone you are equal? So this is being played melodiously on the veena, and the player is Shivan's sister-in-law, Logasundari Amma. Raman takes a liking for Logasundari Amma, and they get married on 2nd June 1907. And by the middle of June 1907, Raman joins the Indian Finance Department as Assistant Accountant General in Calcutta. The reason why he actually chose the Indian Finance Service is because even though his teachers advised Raman that he should go to England for higher studies, the medical officer in Madras said he certified that Raman doesn't have enough health to go to England and stay there in that weather. So he said if Raman goes to England, it's likely that he will die because of ill health. So later on, Raman has said he is eternally thankful to this medical officer who did not allow him to go to England at that time. So the other option was to join the Indian Civil Service. So he joined the Finance Department after writing an examination in which he stood first in the interview, and he joins at the age of about 18 or 19 as Assistant Accountant General in Calcutta. And Raman's wife, Lokasundari, has often said the reason why Raman got married in such haste, the actual reason was that married officers would get an additional allowance of rupees 150 in those days. So that was the real reason of Raman getting married in such a haste. That is her view on this marriage. So this is a photo of Raman in Calcutta as Assistant Accountant General. And it so happens that after reaching Calcutta, he stumbled upon the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science. So the IACS was founded in 1875 by a medical doctor who was a visionary. His name was Mahendra Lal Surkar. And the Maharaja of Vijayanagaram had given him a generous donation, using which Surkar made a good laboratory, but it was mostly unused. So when Raman actually entered the labs, the instruments were in a lot of dust. So he accidentally saw the board of IACS. So after work, he went to the IACS office, and the then secretary of IACS was very happy to hand over the keys of the unused lab to Raman, because when Mahendra Lal died, he was unhappy that the lab that he built was unused. So he actually told his nephew, in fact, Amritlalal Sarkar was his nephew, he told his nephew that in future you should look for young people who will come here and who will do the work that I imagined. So now here is Raman, who is going to Mr. Sarkar without any invitation and requesting that the labs be open for his research. So he was very happy to hand over this. Now this is today's IACS. The premises was not the same in those days. So in those days, famous scientists like Sir J.C. Bose, Sir P.C. Ray, and Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, they all used to give lectures at the association. However, they did not do any research there. So their own research, because they were all teachers, they did their research work in their respective colleges. Then in 1907, Raman is transferred to Rangoon, so the capital of Burma. The new names are Yangon and Myanmar, of course, and he is promoted as a currency officer. And around September 1910, he is posted to Nagpur as Deputy Accountant General, and in 1911, he is getting transferred back to Calcutta again. All this time, in fact, wherever he went, he managed to do his research work. So in the period 1907 to 1914, Raman worked almost alone, but there was one lab assistant. He was fondly called Ashu Babu, to help him at IACS. So initially he started off with some astronomical observations using a 7-inch telescope mounted in the roof. In fact, later on, it was this telescope which allowed him to collect light, work in backward, and use sunlight as a source for, in fact, his measurements. And we also know that Raman's nephew S. Chandrasekhar later won a Physics Nobel Prize for his study of black holes. Raman's enthusiasm and his lectures gradually brought many youngsters to IACS who started working on research problems, mostly acoustics and optics. And in fact, in 1919, Raman became the honorary secretary of IACS following the death of Amritlalal Surkar. So this is a photograph of a seminar happening at IACS. Raman discussing some topic with those who are in attendance. Around this time, Raman is getting an invitation from the Calcutta University. Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, who liked Raman quite a lot, he had been appointed as the Vice Chancellor of the university in 1906. In 1914, he offered the Palith Professorship in Physics to Raman. The appointment was actually delayed for a while due to some fund-related issues. However, Raman resigned from his highly paid government job and joined the university in 1917 in this professor position, even though that would pay him only half of what he would be getting from the government. In fact, his seniors in the finance department, they asked him why you are going, because you are an excellent officer. So the reports about Raman were very good. They said you are an excellent officer, and it's even possible that after a while you may become the finance member in Viceroy's council. But then Raman was determined to do science. His interest was always in research. So he did not really wait in the finance department. He resigned and joined the university in 1917. This is Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee. He started working on acoustics. Even though he joined the university, he worked mostly in the ISES lab, and his work on acoustics and optics brought him a lot of recognition. His papers were always getting published abroad, mostly in English journals, published from England. And his speciality had been the study of the vibrations and sounds of stringed instruments such as the violin, the Indian veena and tambura, and the uniquely Indian percussion instruments such as the tabla and the mridanga. He made a lot of studies on this. And by 1921, Raman had published about 50 articles in optics and acoustics. And around this time, he makes his first trip to England, where he was warmly welcomed by J.J. Thomson and Lord Rutherford, because they knew Raman by name already because of his various publications. And even this trip Raman is making to England upon a little bit of pressure from Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, because for getting appointed into the Palith professorship, one of the conditions in that endowment was that the person who is getting appointed should have a foreign education, foreign experience, which Raman did not have. But Ashutosh Mukherjee, knowing the caliber of Raman, he managed to change that clause and managed to appoint Raman in that position. But still he felt that Raman should have international exposure. So in 1921, an International Universities Congress was happening in Oxford, and then Professor Mukherjee asked Raman to go and participate. That's how Raman made his first trip to England. And he happened to meet many eminent scientists there, which was a very good experience for him. And while coming back from London to Bombay, during that 15-day voyage by ship, he got fascinated by the blue color of the Mediterranean. The real, clean, beautiful blue color of the sea. And it was this voyage which got Raman interested in light scattering phenomena. And the general view that was held in those days regarding why the ocean looks blue was the view given by Lord Rayleigh. So Rayleigh said, this is just a reflection of the sky. We know that the sky is blue. So the sky of the ocean is just a reflection of the sky of the blue. However, using a couple of polarizers, Raman made a small measurement, because we know reflected light is polarized. So he looked at the color of the ocean. He looked at the ocean through a polarizer and an analyzer, and immediately realized that this is not the case. In fact, when the reflected light was suppressed by means of the polarizer, Raman says the ocean became even more brighter. It became even more blue. So immediately this was clear that the color is actually coming from water itself. So this is not really a reflection of the sky. And when the ship docked in Bombay, the first thing Raman did was to send a letter to nature, which showed that the blue of the ocean arises from light scattering. But he argued that the blue of the ocean is not a reflection of the sky, but it arises from light scattering by water molecules. So this is how lab studies in light scattering started in ISCS. And within a few weeks of returning from England, Raman, along with one of his students, Sheshagiri Rao, measured the intensity of light scattering from water. And in 1922, Raman wrote a monograph which was titled Molecular Diffraction of Light. So this is how he called it, molecular diffraction for the scattering phenomenon. Then his work is continuing in various directions, and in 1924, Raman is getting elected as the Fellow of the Royal Society, and in 1926, he founds the Indian Journal of Physics. The name was not the same at that time. The name was actually the Bulletin of the Indian Association. So later the name became the Indian Journal of Physics. And in 1928, on 29th of February, the press announcement of the discovery of the Raman effect. And he publishes the work in the title A New Radiation in the Indian Journal of Physics in 1928. And he also publishes the work in Nature. And in 1929, he gets knighthood, that is, he becomes Sir C.V. Raman. And in 1930, he is awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. So I'll come back to the Raman effect a little later. So right now, let's see his life events. So in 1928, at the time when Raman was intently working on the Raman effect, the scattering of light from various liquids and gases, he had under him in the laboratories of the ISCS 32 research workers, of whom 21 were full-time and 11 worked part-time. There is also the Palith Laboratory of Physics at the university, and the number of research workers who worked there is not exactly known. And by 1938, around 80 positions, mostly in universities and colleges, were occupied by Raman's former students or collaborators. So that was the kind of legacy he had, even at that time. This is a photo of Raman and K.S. Krishnan, who worked along with Raman towards the last phases of the discovery of the Raman effect. And this is a photo with Sommerfeld, which was taken in the association campus in 1928. This is a photo of the Nobel laureates of 1930. We can of course see Raman standing at the extreme left. And he was so confident of winning the Nobel Prize in 1930 that he booked his tickets by ship to Stockholm way before the announcement of the prize. Otherwise, if he had to wait for the announcement of the prize, then he may not be able to get a ticket to reach in time in Stockholm for the award ceremony. So that's why he booked the tickets in advance. And the Nobel Prize actually went into the account of Great Britain. The British national anthem, God Save the Queen, was played when Raman received the prize. Later, Raman said he was sad. In fact, he broke down. After receiving his medallion and after coming back and sitting in his seat, tears rolled down his cheeks. He said he was sad within, as all other winners received their prizes under their own country's flags and national anthems, but India was not an independent country. We did not have a flag, and we did not have an official anthem. So he was a British subject. This is the Nobel medal and the diploma. So this paragraph is interesting. So this letter is from the US ambassador in Sweden, which he wrote back to Washington. At the banquet that evening, Raman's speech was a masterpiece of eloquence, which called forth tremendous applause from a banquet-weary gathering, not noted for their responsiveness. Less appreciative was perhaps the British minister, who sat one place removed from me, who was forced to listen with equanimity to Sir Venkataraman's reference, brief though it was and in passing only, to the congratulatory telegram which he had received from his dearest friend who was now in jail. I think you can guess who was that dearest friend who was now in jail. That was none other than Mahatma Gandhi. So Raman was a great friend and he revered Mahatma Gandhi. And in this picture, we can see Raman right behind Mahatma Gandhi. Some of his other photographs. So this is driving around with friends in Europe. And this is during the Nobel Award ceremony. Lady Raman with a Swedish princess during the ceremony. And in this photo, we can see Heisenberg sitting in this chair here. And this is a talk which Raman is giving in Europe. There are many of these photos, and I've selected only a few representative photographs for this talk. Now, after the Nobel Prize, he joined the IISc Bangalore as director in 1933. Raman served up to 1948 in the IISc. But he had some brushes with then council of the governing council of IISc, and because of which Raman had to step down as the director, but he continued in the same place and he became the professor and head of the IISc physics department. In 1934, Raman founded the Indian Academy of Sciences in Bangalore. And in this photograph, this is a photo taken during that function, and we can see Max Born and Sir Mirza Ismail, who was the Diwan of Mysore. They are standing to either side of Raman in this photograph. In fact, one of the reasons why Raman had differences of opinion with the council of IISc was the appointment of Professor Max Born into IISc. So this was the time when many eminent scientists were fleeing Germany because of the activities of Hitler there. And Raman had ideas of bringing some of them to India. He wrote to a number of prominent people, but it was a little late because many of them were given refuge either by the US or by England, where they had already taken up positions. Max Born, however, he agreed to come, and the initial appointment was temporary for about 6 months, but Raman had every intention to make Max Born's appointment permanent. However, after 6 months, Raman could not make Max Born permanent in the IISc because some people, particularly an English professor who was in the engineering department in IISc, he spoke in the meeting very badly about Max Born, and he said that Max Born is just a second-rate scientist, and the intention of Raman in bringing Max Born to India at a very high salary is not very clear. So these kind of criticisms, actually, Raman, it was very hard for Raman to take because everybody knew the merit of Max Born. There was no doubt about it. But one mistake probably that happened from Raman's side was that, he was a doer of things. He would not really wait for formal permissions and all that. It was without asking the council that he invited Max Born to India. So because of all these issues, Born left in about 6 months to take up a professorship at the University of Edinburgh, because if his position was made permanent, Max Born would have stayed back in Bangalore. Now this is the letter that Raman sent to Max Born inviting him, and this is the letter written by all the students of Max Born. Even though he spent only 6 months here, he left such a mark in whoever he taught in Bangalore, and they wrote a very nice letter. And I thank Mr. Krishnamaraju of the RRI. He was our earlier administrative officer, for bringing this letter to my attention. I think now this is available in the net also. The original somehow happens to be in RRI of this letter. So that was the situation. So Raman continued in IISc as the head of the Department of Physics, and working on his research areas. Now, in this photo, we can actually see Max Born with Raman. This is Mrs. Raman, or Lady Raman, and this is Mrs. Born. So, Mrs. Born and Lady Raman were great friends, and this photograph of Mrs. Born, Lady Born, in an Indian sari, she gave this as a gift to Lokasundari, and we can see written down here, to my dearest sister Lokasundari from Heli. So in 1948, Raman retires from the Indian Institute of Science, and by the time he had already started working on the founding of a research institute for himself, because he wanted to work in peace after retiring from IISc. So this is the Raman Research Institute as it looks now, and these are the photographs taken from the time of the construction of the institute. So you can see this is the initial stages. So now both floors are almost complete. So for funds, Raman accepted some donations from certain Maharajas and princes. They were all his friends in those days. And to add to that, he found money from some chemical industries as well, which he had started along with some of his students to fund the Raman Research Institute. And some of these industries were actually doing pretty well. Unfortunately, Raman could not spend his Nobel money in this. Though it was substantial, some kind of fraud happened, and somebody forced Raman to invest all that money into some kind of investment, and finally, unfortunately, Raman lost most of that money. So he had to find money from other sources. And one thing was very clear: Raman did not want to accept government funds for running RRI, because he believed that whenever you accept government funding, there will be strings attached to it, and the government might ask you to do what you should do. That's not what he wanted to do. He had his own pursuits in science, and he did not want to do anything else. In some ways, this is one reason why we don't really find Raman very much in the big science activities of the country after independence. He kind of confined to his own institute and the kind of research that he wanted to do. In 1954, Raman gets the Bharat Ratna, and in 1957, he is awarded the Lenin Peace Prize by the government of Russia. So in this photograph, Raman is actually showing his spectrograph to some of the visitors to the institute. Now here is Raman again with Heisenberg in the foreground at the Lindau meeting of Nobel laureates in 1956. And here Raman is again in the institute, the Raman Institute, with Prime Minister Nehru. And here Raman and his Nobel nephew, the astrophysicist Chandrasekhar. This photograph is taken around 1952. And here we see three people. So these are Pancharatnam, Ramasheshan, and Chandrasekhar, all of whom were eminent physicists. So all three are sisters of, sons of Raman's sister Sita Lakshmi. Pancharatnam unfortunately passed away pretty early in his career, and Ramasheshan was the director of IAC, and Chandrasekhar was a faculty member in Raman Institute, but later he started his own liquid crystal research institute in Bangalore. In RRI, Raman's areas of research were mostly in crystal physics, crystal optics, mineralogy, and the physiology of vision. Certainly, these were not the very fashionable kind of stuff, because Nehru and his advisors felt the need for developing atomic energy for the country, and a little later they also felt the need for developing the space technologies. So a lot of work was happening in these directions. and chains of laboratories were being built. The CSIR was getting founded, and somehow Raman believed that those kind of labs, lot of activity with so many people working, that kind of a model is not really very good for the country. So this is what Raman believed, and therefore he was one who believed in individual eminence, individual excellence. So that's why he founded his institute, and he chose very carefully about half a dozen students around him. And from 1948 to 1960, these Raman and these students made significant contributions to the fields of crystal physics and crystal optics. And in the last 10 years of his life, he worked without really any students or assistants. Now, Raman was always fascinated by crystals and minerals, and particularly diamonds. He would go to any extent to procure diamonds from whoever had them. He would buy a lot of diamonds actually, and always after buying a particular diamond, he would take a pledge: I won't spend my money again to buy another diamond. But then there was a diamond dealer in Bangalore who knew Raman's weakness for diamonds. He would come every month. So even though Raman takes this pledge, after a month, this guy will come and show Raman a very nice diamond. So Raman forgets all his pledge and he will go and buy that diamond. So that way, a lot of diamonds he had, a lot of other minerals also. So some of these are at display at the RRI Museum now also. And he worked on the color of these crystals and minerals. Color was always a fascination for him. So he wanted to study the color of crystals, minerals, the color of birds, the color of butterflies and all that, and did a lot of work in that. Eventually, he started working on the physiology of vision itself, how the eye works. So these were the kind of studies Raman did in the last phase of his life. And in the last years, Raman welcomed many school and college students to RRI. He was kind of disgusted with the way science was progressing in the country because the direction was not in the way he thought. At one point, even he laments that my life was a failure. So this was at a time when he was in agony. He believed whatever he believed in individual excellence, individual eminence, and those things were not happening in the country. So this was a time of reclusion, and he kind of confined himself to the Raman Institute for quite a while. But after this phase, he in fact came out of that. He decided to welcome school children and college students to RRI because he found that their minds are very fresh. You can tell them about the mysteries of nature and they are very receptive, and one could also inculcate scientific temper in them. And he was a master speaker. He was a great orator. People who have heard his talk, there are very senior faculty in RRI now who have actually heard Raman when they were school students like this. So they have told me that this unparalleled eloquence Raman had. And even his papers, when we read his scientific papers, these are written in the old style, but I mean, it has such a force, such a presence that it cannot be ignored. Anything Raman said, he would not write one word extra. These are masterpieces of writing. One really has to read Raman's papers on the Raman effect itself, for example. So he would walk around the campus with all these children and talk to them about nature and its mysteries. In fact, many of those students who heard Raman in those days, they chose science as their career later on. There was a brief illness, and Raman knew that he is going to die, and he passed away peacefully on 21st November 1970 at the age of 82. Ramasheshan was with him at that time, and Raman demanded for a simple, clean cremation without rituals and Jambamumbu. So according to his wish, he was cremated in the lawn of the Raman Research Institute, and today just a solitary tree stands there in the Ararai lawn, marking the place where Raman was cremated. There are no monuments, nothing else. Now let's look at his path to the Nobel Prize, because there are many stories about how Raman won the Nobel. So we have to, it is good to see exactly how it happened. As we know, Raman got interested in light scattering in 1921, and after his trip, after coming back from England, he started working on the scattering of light in his lab. And the very first student who did this task was Sheshagiri Rao. Then, at Raman's suggestion, one of his collaborators and students, Kalpathy Ramakrishna Ramanathan, K.R. Ramanathan, he carried out experiments in 1923 that Raman later interpreted as crucial to the discovery of the Raman effect. Ramanathan studied the intensity of light scattered by liquids, and he found a trace of fluorescence. So this is the word they used, fluorescence, because there was no better word. A trace of fluorescence in strongly anisotropic molecules. So Raman reports that the origin of the fluorescence has yet not been definitely ascertained. In spite of many redistillations, the effect remained practically undiminished, because they initially thought the trace of fluorescence is probably, it's coming from some kind of impurity in the system, in the liquids. So they had distillation units. In spite of several redistillations, the effect remained practically undiminished. Later, Ramanathan became the first director of the PRL Ahmedabad. And it's around this time, that's in 1923, that Compton had just discovered the effect that bears his name, Compton effect, and later he receives the Nobel Prize in 1927 for this discovery. The Compton effect actually influences Raman. At first, he was a little skeptical about it, and in one of the meetings that happened in England, he even questioned Compton on the authenticity of his observations. However, it became clear after a while that the Compton effect is something that happens in reality. So here what happens is an X-ray of wavelength lambda comes in from the left, collides with a target at rest, and a new photon of wavelength lambda prime emerges at an angle. So here is lambda prime, this is lambda, and the target recoils, carrying away an angle-dependent amount of the incident energy. Essentially, the X-ray photons are scattered by electrons in the target. So that's what is happening. This is inelastic scattering. The X-ray photons are scattered by electrons in the target. So Compton effect was another proof of the quantum nature of light. Then Raman started thinking whether the weak fluorescence observed by Ramanathan was an optical analog of the Compton effect. So this is where Raman starts thinking. So we know the quantum nature of electromagnetic radiation. Now this is very well established. So Compton scattering is one of the three competing processes that occur when high energy photons interact with matter, all of which prove the quantum nature of light. So these three phenomena are first the photoelectric effect, then the Compton effect, and then pair production. So photoelectric effect is with high energy photons, Compton effect with very high energy photons, and pair production is with extremely high energy photons. So in a typical Compton effect experiment, we have an X-ray source here, a molybdenum source here, and there is a filter or spectrometer, and the K-alpha line goes out from after the filter, and then there's a scattering substance, and the scattered X-rays go in this direction. Then you have the spectrometer, which looks at the energy of the scattered X-rays. And here, energies of a few electron volts to a few kilo electron volts that is, radiation from the visible through soft X-rays results in photoelectric effect, and energies from about 50 keV to 3 MeV, that is X-rays to gamma rays, result in Compton effect, and 1.022 MeV and above gamma rays results in wave production. So this picture is pretty illustrative. So we can see that here the regime of radio waves, microwave, infrared, visible, ultraviolet, X-ray and gamma ray. As we go towards the right side, we start calling the region rays, X-rays, gamma rays, and here we call radio waves, microwaves. The naming itself is suggestive of the increasing particle nature of radiation at the higher frequency regions. For example, radio waves have the scale of wavelength in the order of buildings, big buildings, and then it comes to the size of humans, and in microwave we are like in between the size of humans and butterflies, and in infrared it's like needle point. When we come to the visible region of the spectrum, the size is similar to that of protozoans. In ultraviolet, molecular size, and when we come to X-rays, the size, the wavelength is that of atomic size, and when we reach gamma rays, the wavelength is of the size of atomic nuclei. And Raman was an early proponent. This is not really very well documented, but this is a fact. He was an early proponent of the quantum nature of light. He even predicted the advent of quantum field theory. In 1923, he said that Maxwell's equations will need to be revisited by introducing the idea of the photon, introducing the idea of the optical quantum into it. And it was after 7 years that Dirac actually started developing the quantum field theory. So Raman in duty on all these subjects. One of them Raman had, and in 1925, K.S. Krishnan observed, as K.R. Ramanathan had done before him, a feeble fluorescence when light was scattered by various liquids. So he tried something like 50 various liquids, including water, ether, monohydric alcohols, benzyl and benzol chlorides, methyl, many different kind of chemicals like this. And attempts to determine the spectrum of this feeble fluorescence failed initially. It was difficult to measure the spectrum because the intensity was too low. In fact, only a tiny fraction of light, that is like 1 part in 10 to the power 8, experiences a change in the frequency when scattered like this. It's at this time that Compton's Nobel Prize is being announced. And the moment Raman heard about Compton's Nobel Prize, he was almost completely convinced that the feeble so-called fluorescence that they see in these liquids was the optical analog of the Compton effect. So immediately, Raman and Krishnan started vigorous measurements around January 1928, and they observed scattered secondary radiation of smaller frequency from 60 different liquids and vapors. These were visual observations in a dark room using filtered sunlight as the light source. The scattered light was polarized and of relatively low intensity. So because of these two properties, they could rule out the possibility that it was fluorescence. Raman sent an article to Nature on the discovery, which he signed on 16th February 1928. And on 28th February, Raman and Krishnan repeated the measurement using a bright mercury lamp as the light source. So they changed from sunlight to a bright mercury lamp because that gives a much brighter light, and a filter placed in the incident light path cut off all visible wavelengths longer than the indigo 4358 angstroms line from the mercury lamp, because mercury lamp gives out a few lines. So everything other than the 4358 angstroms line was cut, and then the scattering was observed through a direct vision spectroscope using another filter. Two sharp lines were seen in the blue-green region. So the light that went into the sample was indigo, but two sharp lines were seen in the blue-green region. So this was final confirmation. The announcement of the discovery, this happened on 28th, and the announcement of the discovery was made on 29th February 1928 to the Associated Press. So what we have to remember here, it's a very important point, that Raman effect was not discovered in one day. Some people believe that it was just discovered just like that and announced the world on the following. This is not really true, not at all true. Raman had started working on molecular scattering from as early as 1921 after coming back from England. So his measurements, what they saw, and one thing that is important to note is that until this time, they were just observing the phenomenon. They were not really recording it on a photographic plate or anything. They saw the phenomenon in so many samples, but final recording happened only at this time. And that's how the Raman effect was discovered. And the spectrum had to be photographed. So they did that using a quartz spectrograph. And then it was found that the shift in frequency was identified. It was the change in the energy of the vibrational state of the molecule. So this was the missing point. So all this time, Raman was trying to understand, okay, there is an analog of the Compton effect in the visible spectral region. In Compton, we know the scattering is by electrons. But in the visible spectral region, where is the scattering? What is scattering the input light? So now here is the answer. The scattering is because of the vibration of the molecule. So immediately Raman sends on 8 March 1928 another article to Nature. And Raman first showed the spectra to the public during a lecture he gave at the meeting of the South Indian Scientists Association on March 16, 1928. This lecture was published in the Indian Journal of Physics on 31st March, and Raman sent 2,000 copies of that article to scientists across the world in France, Germany, Russia, Canada, and the United States. So that way, Raman's primacy in these measurements was completely established. And this is the paper he wrote to Nature. Raman and Krishnan, they wrote together to Nature on the 16th of February. So a new type of secondary radiation. We can see that even now, even though they see the radiation, it's not very clear to them how exactly this happens. The theory is not still clear to them. So this is the paper. And then a new radiation, this is the inaugural address delivered before the South Indian Science Association on 16th of March and reprinted from the Indian Journal of Physics, Volume 2, Part 3. And this particular copy is the one which he sent to Niels Bohr, to Professor Niels Bohr, with the author's highest regards. Essentially, the Raman effect is this. So this is the original setup Raman initially used. Sunlight, white light is coming, you put a violet filter there, so violet light is coming out. Then there is a scattering. Your sample is here. It's a scattering liquid, let us say. And of course, there is Rayleigh scattering at the same frequency. In addition to that, there is also the Raman scattered light. So to see the Raman scattered light, you put a green filter there. So the green filter will cut off the violet. It will allow only the green light to pass through. So the observer sees the green light. You put in violet light, but you get green light. So this is basically Raman scattering. This is different from fluorescence in that the medium is not really absorbing light. It's only it's a scattering process. So that is the difference with fluorescence in this case. So this is the Raman effect. And his light sources, of course, he used sunlight a lot. And in collimating, in getting fairly intense sunlight, the refracting telescope helped him. So then this is sunlight focused using the 7-inch refracting telescope of IACS. Later, he is using a powerful mercury arc lamp in 1928. This was his quartz spectrograph and the first Raman spectrum, which was photographed in 1928. A modern Raman spectrometer essentially uses a laser beam. It does not use sunlight or even a mercury lamp, and otherwise the technology is essentially the same. It is not that Raman did not have any competitors. The Russian physicists Landsberg and Mandelstam, they communicated spectra. They were working on very similar lines, and they communicated spectra of inelastically scattered light from some crystals to the Natural Vision Shafton on May 6, 1928, which got published in July 1928. Actually, they communicate only on the 6th of May, and the publication happens in July 1928. By this time, about 16 papers on Raman effect were published by different groups from around the world. And the Russians reported exposure times of 2 to 14 hours and 100 hours under different conditions for crystals. Later, for vapors, exposure times of more than 180 hours were required. One reason probably why the Russians were a little late to see this was they completely concentrated on quartz. And these scientists, they purchased quartz from a local vendor, and each time they asked for high quality quartz, and the vendor was a cheat, so he always gave them low quality quartz and charged the money for high quality quartz. And the trouble with low quality quartz is that there is a lot of scattering from all the imperfections, and because Raman scattering is extremely weak, if you have that much background scattering, then it becomes impossible to really see Raman scattering from that noise. So that's what happened. So finally, only when they managed to get a clean quartz crystal, they were able to record the Raman spectra in them. And while 10 scientists from different countries nominated Raman for the Nobel Prize, only 2 scientists who were from Russia nominated Landsberg and Mandelstam for the Nobel Prize. In fact, for a long time in Russia, they would not call the effect Raman effect. They always used to call that the Mandelstam effect. However, now things are changed and they also call the effect Raman effect. And the reception of the news. In fact, Raman's experiments could not be repeated successfully in Munich, in Sommerfeld's lab. However, he wrote on June 9 that, in my opinion, Raman is correct. He writes to me that the difference between the lines is exactly equal to the infrared frequencies of the molecules under consideration. And in Berlin, the German experimental physicist Peter Pringsheim, he repeated Raman's experiment successfully and sent his spectra to Sommerfeld on 20th of June. And it's Pringsheim who coined the terms Raman effect and Raman lines. So he's the one who called the effect Raman effect for the first time. And soon after, several publications appeared on Raman effect in various materials from all over the world. The theory of Raman effect is well known. I don't really want to delve too much in this, except to say that in Rayleigh scattering, what happens is you put in a certain frequency into the system, and there is an excitation of a virtual level, and from the virtual level, the photon comes back elastically without really giving any energy into the system. So in Rayleigh scattering, we have the same frequency of the photon going in and coming out. However, in Raman scattering, in normal Stokes Raman scattering, again the same kind of scattering phenomenon occurs, and the excitation is to a virtual state. The electronic state is high up here, and it's not we are not really going to that state.
Hello.
So then the return is to a vibrational state, which is not a vibrational excited state.
Yeah, it's been there
So
for last
S0 is the electronic and vibrational ground state, but this level N1 is actually an excited vibrational state. So when this happens, the frequency is changed because the energy, part of the energy goes into the system as a vibration. And this is called Stokes Raman scattering. In the case of anti-Stokes Raman scattering, there is already a system in an excited vibration state N1, and the incoming photon gets scattered through the virtual level, and the photon that goes out of the system now has the energy of the incoming photon plus the vibrational energy of the system. So this is known as anti-Stokes Raman scattering. The advantage or the distinction from fluorescence is as follows. In the case of fluorescence, the excitation happens between two electronic states. So this is the ground electronic state with several vibrational levels, and excitation is to the first excited electronic state, and from there, from the lowest level of that electronic state, there is a relaxation to the ground state, and this produces photons. So the emission of these photons, this is known as fluorescence. And this is a very strong process in many materials. Some materials, some laser dyes, for example, they have fluorescence quantum yields very close to 1, for example. However, that is not the case with normal Raman. So here we see that the excitation is not to an electronic state but to a virtual state here, and then coming back to a vibrational state. And if you look in time, we can see that the excitation and the Raman process, it's a parametric process. The Raman process happens exactly at the same time, more or less. However, the fluorescence is a bit delayed because of the lifetime of the excited state. And the relative intensities, as we can imagine, the Stokes lines are pretty strong, but the anti-Stokes lines are much weaker in comparison. This is a typical Raman spectrum taken for benzonitrile. And the spectrum is measured in Raman shift, in units of Raman shift, how many centimeter inverse. The applications of Raman spectroscopy. Raman remarked in his 1930 Nobel Prize address that the character of the scattered radiations enable us to obtain an insight into the ultimate structure of the scattering substance. So this was precisely the use of Raman spectroscopy. First of all, the Raman effect is a true demonstration of the quantum nature of the photon. So in that sense, as a fundamental discovery, it's very, very important. In addition to that, it also allows us to get an insight, in fact measure the structure of scattering of the scattering substance. And in the first 7 years after the discovery, the Raman effect was a subject of more than 700 papers in the scientific literature, mostly by physicists who were using the technique to study the vibration and rotation of molecules and relating those phenomena to the molecular structure. So that way, this was a fingerprint. The unique spectrum of Raman scattered light for any particular substance serves as a fingerprint that could be used for qualitative analysis even in a mixture of materials. Moreover, the intensity of the spectral lines is related to the amount of the substance. A bit later, in fact, infrared spectroscopy took over. But then Raman came back as laser Raman after 1960. So what happened was, during the Second World War, infrared spectroscopy was enhanced by the development of sensitive detectors and advances in electronics. And infrared measurements quickly became routine operations, while Raman measurements still required skilled operators and darkroom facilities. Raman spectroscopy could not compete with infrared spectroscopy until another development in physics, the laser. With the advent of the laser, Raman spectroscopy was revived in a new form, that is laser Raman spectroscopy, beginning in the 1960s. Why infrared spectroscopy competed with Raman is because both these techniques in fact give complementary information most of the time, with which we can find out the structure of molecules. So that's why at the time of Raman discovering the effect, infrared spectroscopy was very nascent, and there were issues with detectors, for example. So even though both give the same information, one can do Raman spectroscopy using visible light, and the detectors, you don't really need any specialized equipment. because normal detectors, I mean, we know how easily, what a simple setup Raman used for getting his spectra. And those spectra, with such a very simple setup, gives you vibrational state information. And if you wanted to do the same kind of experiment to get the same information by infrared spectroscopy, then the technical challenges were very high. So this was one of the additional attractions of Raman spectroscopy at that time. Anyway, now both techniques are equally competent. Laser Raman is extremely capable. And just to show how Raman is useful in extraplanetary exploration, the Perseverance rover in Mars, so it has a camera which is called Sherlock, and Sherlock contains a Raman spectrometer. The expansion of Sherlock is scanning habitable environments with Raman and luminescence for organics and chemicals. So this is that camera. And then we have coherent anti-Stokes Raman spectroscopy, also known as CARS, for flame and combustion analysis. So this is the standard technique used by motor companies for motor vehicle engine combustion diagnostics. This is the basics of this is anti-Stokes Raman spectroscopy. It has applications in the study of plasma ignition processes in aircraft engines, especially where complex mixtures of hydrocarbon fuels are used. Not only in aircraft engines, but also in normal cars and all that. And then we have the Raman laser, which is based on stimulated Raman scattering. If the Raman medium is kept within a suitably designed optical cavity, then the net Raman gain can be substantially increased, resulting in what is known as a Raman laser. And Raman lasers and amplifiers, they are used today in the telecom industry, and they rely on miles of optical fiber to amplify light. So what was or what is Raman's legacy? As we know, Raman established the IACS Calcutta as a fine research center, true to the vision of the founder of IACS. Then he founded the Indian Academy of Sciences and also the Raman Research Institute. In the course of 40 years, about 500 students passed through his direct mentorship. About 1,500 papers came out of the experiments they did under Raman's supervision. Raman himself published about 450 papers. Raman would not accept government funds for running RRI. However, while in his deathbed, he relieved his successors of this condition. So after that, as we know, RRI is a part of the Department of Science and Technology. Raman said, success can only come to you by courageous devotion to the task lying in front of you. And there is nothing worth in this world that can come without the sweat of our brow. I have to acknowledge certain books and also some people. So the first book from which most of these pictures are taken is C.V. Raman, a pictorial biography by S. Ramasheshan and C. Ramachandra Rao, published by the Indian Academy of Sciences, 1988. The first print came out. Raman and His Effect by G. Venkataraman, by Universities Press, 1995. And C.V. Raman, a biography by Uma Parameswaran, Penguin, India, 2011. And I have directly heard stories and got anecdotal information from Mr. Krishnavaraju, the retired administrative officer of RRI. Particularly, he provided the letter written forborne by his students. And Mr. Rajakuti, who was a staff member of RRI, who knew Mrs. Raman well, and he's now retired. And also Mr. Shashikumar, who was the museum in charge of RRI. All these people have given, when I had discussions with them over many years, I came to know many things about Raman and the institute. So I thank all of them for their contribution. And now this is the lone tree. This is where Raman was cremated, in the RRI lawn, and there is just one tree standing there in his memory. Thanks a lot for your kind attention.
Reggie.
Yes, Ravi.
Reggie, thank you very much for this wonderful talk.
Thanks a lot, Ravi.
In fact, I remember my mother telling me long time back about having listened to Raman in one of his talks. And that reminds me when you mentioned that fact that he used to be a wonderful speaker. I remembered that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful speaker. I mean, it is written. See, when we
Do you
read,
have any audio files of his talks in RRI Museum?
we actually have a video, but yes, I'm aware of that video. Is even available in the net.
No, I mean a recording of some of his talks. There's RRI.
That I have to check that.
Okay, it'll be fun to listen to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. So because he used to give radio talks and all that. In fact, I mean, I haven't included some of the photographs.
Okay.
See, he used to give talks in big grounds and all.
Okay.
Like hundreds of people would come. Ordinary people, hundreds of people would come and attend. There are some photos I in fact I did not include. I forgot actually.
Okay.
So he was that kind of an orator. I'll check with the institute, and if there is something, we will settle. Yeah.
So if anyone has any questions, they can now ask.
Ravi sir, I have just clarification. I need one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for such an excellent talk. I was wondering that at the time when Raman was discovering his effect, the quantum mechanics was also actually developing during those days. So from where he actually adopted the knowledge of quantum mechanics so that he could explain his phenomena.
Oh, it was already there. I mean, see, the old quantum theory was already in place by Planck, and then Einstein explained the photoelectric effect, which is also
very recent at that time for him.
Yeah, 1905. That time Einstein had already explained. So, and the modern quantum theory was coming up, like all the theoretical foundations were being built. Schrodinger already was Schrodinger and Heisenberg. So they were already on it. So, but the thing was, not everyone was very receptive, or not everybody was very not everyone accepted the quantum theory at that point of time. But it is very interesting to see that Raman embraced these ideas, and he considered Einstein with lot of reverence. And he had actually no doubt about the special theory of relativity or even the GTR when it came later. So in that sense, Raman actually was extremely intelligent for one thing. Extremely intelligent, extremely intuitive, and his logic was unbeaten. So this we will see if we actually read through his papers.
Yeah, it's very interesting to know that without having any collaboration of any quantum mechanics physicists at that time, he independently discovered.
Oh yeah. I would say his intuition was so high and his intellect was so high that he could really see through. See, once in fact, Max Born made, many people have said many things about Raman. One that Max Born said is very interesting. He said Raman's mind leaps over mathematics. So a normal guy needs to write down mathematics, and you have to proceed through that to come to final conclusions. But Raman's mind leaps over mathematics. So he goes to the result directly. So this was said by no one other than Max Born. So, so that was a kind of a giant he was. The unfortunate thing that happened was Raman had his own ideas about doing science, which did not agree very well with the views of science for independent India. So as I mentioned, Nehru had very different vision about the growth of science in India, And he proceeded with that. Immediately in 1948 itself, the atomic energy, the committee for that was set up, and DAE was formed very soon. So, but Raman's interest was more in nature. He was an observer of nature, and he wanted to explain things like the color of the butterfly, color of the minerals, the physiology of vision and things. That's why actually, this is the reason why we don't really find Raman in the group of people who actually built big science for India.
Thank you once again for the nice talk.
Thank you.
Raji, I have one more question if you don't mind.
Sure.
What was his contribution to acoustics, I mean, studying acoustics, and was it pursued later on at RMIT?
Not really. All his acoustics experiments. See, like for example, one of the questions he asked himself was about the rich tone of the veena. So the answer that he found is that, I mean, I haven't understood this fully, but what I read is the following. See, there was a theory that said that when you pluck the string on any stringed instrument, a note cannot form at the point of plucking. So there was a theory like that. However, Raman found that the bridge of the veena is so cleverly crafted that wherever you pluck, you can get a note. Yes. And the advantage of this is that there will be a rich set of overtones.
Okay.
So all the harmonics together, that gives you that, you know, a body to the music, as you know very well, Ravi. So that gives body and soul to the music, the richness of the harmonics. So this was one of the early observations of Raman.
But he didn't pursue acoustics much further as he did with optics.
Not really. In fact, acoustics was his area in the initial phase in ISCS.
Okay.
So after his trip from 1907 up to almost 1921, he did a lot of work in acoustics. Like he compared the percussion instruments. He actually said the Western percussion instruments don't have the richness of the tone of the Indian percussion instruments like the mridangam.
Okay.
And he also found the reason for that. He said the Indian mridangam is not a uniform surface. We have that, you know.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
part.
exactly. It's not uniform, and that non-uniformity actually gives it that richness. So, but all these studies, the acoustic studies actually gave way to optical studies after 1921.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what.
I was also correlating this with based on your talk only, that his knowledge of this acoustics and identifying the notes and of the instrument actually helped him to find out the vibrational modes in the quantum mechanics.
Quite possible.
Dr. Raji Philip, may I ask a question? I'm another Ravi from IPR.
Oh, okay. Please.
So this is very fascinating, you know, because I was hearing about acoustics. I knew all along that the early work was on acoustics, but have these been, kind of documented? These things have been documented?
Oh yes, there are publications.
Okay.
Raman published a lot on acoustics also.
Yeah, very fascinating. Me and both Dr. Me and Dr. A.B., we both, we like music a lot.
I know.
I know Dr. Ravi is a very, he's a flautist and he plays.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I know.
So this is really very fascinating, because
yes.
acoustics is something which we always talk about our own traditional instruments and how they, the effects they have on our the environment and on the.
Exactly.
Okay. So these have been mainly published in which journal? May I know?
Yes. I mean, in all, like Philosophical Magazine, even Nature.
Early 1900s, right?
Yeah. There is the collected works of Raman should be there.
Okay.
So in that you will see all this. See, unfortunately, what happened is Raman is known only for the Raman effect, because that's what fetched him the Nobel Prize.
Correct.
He in fact did a lot of other work.
Yeah, that's right. I think his nephew also adopted or maybe inherited some of these qualities.
Well,
Because Chandrasekhar worked on various things. He worked on mathematics, he worked on astrophysics, so many other things. So, but he's
as somebody, as somebody remarked, science runs through the family. So they're all scientists of very high caliber.
Thanks a lot for your very interesting talk.
Thank you.
Professor Philip, it is Moinak from IPL. I have a small queries. It is a wonderful talk, but I understood that the observation for which the Nobel Prize is awarded to Raman is actually first observed by a student. Why his name is not so famous later?
Whose name is not famous?
The students who observed the first.
You mean K.S. Krishnan?
Krishnan, yes.
See, in fact, this is not true. See, that's why I had mentioned in my talk that what Krishnan observed was, he observed, of course, but this was not the first time. That is one thing. From 1921 onwards, there was work in Raman's lab on light scattering from liquids and also vapor. So this was happening. Many students worked on it, but it was after Compton received the Nobel Prize. That was actually the major trigger point. While Raman was doing this, he was also doing various other things and he was publishing. So this was always in the back of his mind. Is there an optical analog for the Compton effect, which happens in the experiments? But it was when Compton, he never expected that Compton would get a Nobel Prize just 4 years after discovering it. Compton discovers this in 1923 and he gets a Nobel Prize in 1927. So that incident actually convinced Raman that this is certainly something he has to look through further and get to the end of it. So that's why he calls Krishnan immediately and he is asking Krishnan to do these measurements one after the other. And Krishnan, of course, he's a brilliant theorist and he made his own mark in Indian science and he was in big places certainly. But he was more of a theorist in those days than an experimentalist, and it is documented that the last experiment Krishnan did was something like 20 months before, and Raman asked him specifically to do these measurements, and Krishnan did those measurements and it was seen. But it's not correct to say that the effect was not seen before. In fact, many students have contributed to this by way of observation. But it was ultimately, it was Raman who asked them to do it, and it was Raman's idea. That's my belief. So after going through, quite a bit of literature on what happened, even Krishnan's diary is available. So that's available in books. So if we read through that, we can clearly see that Raman is very much there. It is Raman's own suggestion to do this. And all this is triggered by Compton getting the Nobel Prize in 1927.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no more questions, let us all thank Professor Raji Philip for his wonderful talk, which gave us some different insights and different perspectives about Sir C.V. Raman. Thank you once again, Raji. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks a lot, Ravi. Thank you so much.
Hope to
Thanks
see
a
you.
lot for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.